prosperous neighborhood away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Richard lived a relatively peaceful life. His father's demanding job often took him far away, and Richard longed for the precious hours spent together on weekends. On a chilly Friday evening just a few months ago, a series of events had taken place that had forever changed his perception of a quiet suburban existence. That evening, Richard's friend, Zach, had come over for a sleepover. They had spent most of the night working on a history project that had been keeping them up all night, but the work was almost done and they tossed their textbooks aside and started goofing around. Laughter and jokes filled the room as they played Xbox, seemingly oblivious to the world around them. Around 9 o'clock in the evening, Richard's mother entered the room, diligently working in the kitchen. She looked at the teenagers with a warm smile and announced, "Boys, I need to go into town right away. It's about a 30-minute drive. Can you two manage here by yourselves?" Richard and Zach exchanged quick glances and nodded in agreement. "Of course, Mom. We'll manage. Just come back soon," Richard assured her. With those words, she walked out of the house, leaving the boys to themselves. They continued to play and chat, enjoying the newfound sense of freedom that comes from being alone in the house for a while. However, as the evening progressed and the shadows outside grew longer, an eerie feeling began to creep into the room. At first it was a faint noise, almost imperceptible, similar to the distant rustling of leaves. Richard and Zach exchanged perplexed glances, but ignored it, figuring it was the wind or some other benign source. As the minutes passed, the noise continued, growing louder and more insistent. It was coming from the window overlooking the backyard. Richard had 2 dogs, and he assumed they were the cause of the strange noise. They were known to chase squirrels and rabbits in the yard, making a lot of noise. However, this noise was not like their usual antics. There was a sense of urgency, as if someone was struggling or fumbling. The boys exchanged concerned glances, their playful laughter turning to tense whispers. They decided to figure it out and cautiously approached the window. As they approached, the rustling became more and more distinct, accompanied by faint grunts and labored breathing. Anxiety gripped Richard and Zach, and they glanced around apprehensively. The decision to open the blinds and look outside was not made immediately. With trembling hands they slowly lifted the blinds, revealing what they saw. Their hearts raced as they saw the shocking sight before them. There was a bleeding man lying on the ground just below Richard's bedroom window, his face contorted in pain and suffering. Blood stains blurred on the grass and tattered clothes added to the grim picture. Richard and Zach recoiled from the window in panic, their minds blurred with shock. "What the hell are we going to do?" Zach whispered. "We should call Mom," replied Richard, fumbling for his phone. They quickly dialed her number, their voices shaking as they recounted the scary find. Parking the car, Richard's mother hurried home, her heart in her throat. The boys met her at the front door, frightened and on the verge of tears. Together they walked cautiously out to the backyard where the injured man lay. He was moaning quietly, his eyes half closed, gathering all her courage. Richard's mother called 911 and, in a trembling voice, described the situation to the dispatcher. A few minutes later, sirens were heard in the distance and grew louder and louder until a police car and ambulance arrived. Paramedics quickly assessed the victim's condition and began treating him. The police officers took statements from Richard, Zach, and Richard's mother, trying to piece together what had happened. Over the following days, the truth was gradually revealed. It turned out that the injured man was a homeless drug addict who had gotten into a violent argument with another man. The strange sounds Richard and Zach heard were really the man's desperate attempts to get to his feet and reach Richard's window. The incident left an indelible mark on Richard and Zach's memory. It was a stark reminder that even in the most peaceful and prosperous neighborhoods, danger can lurk outside the window. Their quiet life in the suburbs was forever changed, and they would always remember that fateful Friday night when their innocence was shattered by a terrifying encounter with the dark side of the world. In the sleepy town of Willowbrook, nestled among the hills in upstate New York, life flowed at a measured pace. The story begins on a cool fall evening. The sun has dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows. The townsfolk, seeking solace from the encroaching darkness, have settled down in their living rooms to watch television in the evening. In one such living room, located in a quaint cottage on Elm Street, sat Sarah Anderson. She was a woman in her 30s with warm hazel eyes and blonde hair that framed her face. In soft waves, Sarah was a person of habit, and her evening routine always included watching her favorite crime drama on television. The series was her secret pleasure, an exciting escape from Willowbrook's ordinariness. Sitting on the cozy couch and never taking her eyes off the screen, Sarah felt a strange sense of unease hovering in the air. The TV characters were arguing heatedly, their faces contorted with anger. But then, as if the world itself had frozen in time, the image on the screen suddenly froze. There was a loud, disturbing rumble that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. Her heart raced as the hum grew louder, drowning out all other sounds in the room. She leaned closer to the television, her eyes widening with fear and confusion. And then, as if from the depths of hell itself, a blood-chilling scream burst through the airwaves. "I hate you," screamed a voice full of rage and anguish. Sarah's hands trembled and she clutched the remote control, desperately trying to turn off the TV, but the voice wouldn't stop. It was as if it had taken over all the air in the room. "I'll kill you," the voice shouted, its tone rising to a ghostly crescendo. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest and a cold sweat broke out on her forehead. She couldn't understand what was happening. Was this some kind of twisted prank? A technical glitch? Just when she thought she couldn't take it anymore, the room plunged into darkness. The humming stopped, and the terrifying voice fell silent. Sarah gasped, fumbling for her flashlight and phone. The anxiety she felt was hard to put into words. A minute later, the lights came back on, and the TV was showing her favorite cartoon from her early childhood as if nothing had happened. In the heart of the bustling city of Cascade Falls, among the high-rise apartment buildings, was Justin's unassuming home. His apartment, located on the 4th floor of the complex, was where he sought refuge from the cacophony of the urban jungle outside his window. He didn't yet know that one fateful night would forever shatter the tranquility of his life. As the clock struck midnight, Justin lay in his bed, shrouded in a thin shroud of sleep. The rhythmic hum of the city's nightlife served as a distant lullaby, lulling him to sleep. However, the tranquility was abruptly shattered by a woman's piercing scream echoing down the hallway. Justin sat up abruptly in bed, his heart pounding in his chest. He already knew the couple living across the hall from him all too well. Their volatile relationship often spilled out into the common area, but tonight was different. This was a whole new level of chaos. He strained to listen, his senses heightened with fear and anxiety. A heated argument was breaking out, accompanied by the sounds of heavy blows and a flurry of curses filling the air. "You can't take my son. Call 911, he took my son," shouted a female voice hysterically. Frozen in place, Justin stood in front of his bedroom door, his breathing shallow and his thoughts racing frantically. Adrenaline raged in his veins as he tried to realize the gravity of the situation unfolding just steps away from his own apartment. He wished he could say he was calling for help or rushing to intervene, but fear held him captive. Amidst the raucous screaming and yelling, a deafening rumbling sounded in the hallway. Justin's blood ran cold when he realized it was the sound of a door being ripped off its hinges. The scuffle between the couple had gotten out of control. Desperation and terror emanated from the woman across the hall. She was pounding on Justin's door, clenching her fists with frantic force. "Please help me," she pleaded in a voice breaking with fear. Paralyzed with fear, Justin froze in place, unable to muster the courage to answer or open the door. He listened to the woman's wistful pleas echoing through the apartment, their words a reminder of his inaction. Minutes passed for what seemed like an eternity. The woman continued to plead for help, her voice growing more and more desperate. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the knocking stopped, and Justin heard her footsteps moving away. Cautiously peering through the peephole of his apartment, he saw a nightmarish scene. The walls were covered in blood, and the door across the hall was hanging on its hinges, an ominous testament to what had happened. The reality of what was happening began to clear, filling him with a deep sense of guilt and horror. Moments later, the distant wail of sirens pierced the night, growing louder as it drew closer. The police had arrived, summoned by someone braver than Justin, but the events that followed remained in his memory like a blur. The fear that had gripped him with such force seemed to subside, and he found himself moving almost mechanically, Perhaps it was shock or fatigue, but he could not remember what happened next. As the cacophony of police radios and flashing red and blue lights filled the hallway, Justin fled to his apartment. The events of that terrible night would haunt him for years to come, reminding him of the consequences of inaction and the fragility of the walls that separated him from the turmoil unfolding just steps from his door. In one quiet town, amidst a serene landscape of tall trees and manicured lawns, stood a row of townhouses. Among them, one townhouse always attracted the attention of passers-by with its unique feature, the skylight that adorned its living room. This architectural marvel allowed natural light to flood the house during the day and offered a mesmerizing view of the starry night sky as the sun dipped below the horizon. One fateful evening, the tranquility was shattered by a violent hailstorm. The fury of the storm relentlessly pelted the townhouse complex with golf ball-sized hailstones. Residents of the complex watched in horror as their cars and rooftops took the brunt of the elements. Among the storm's victims were several cracked skylights, including one in a townhouse that had a spectacular view of the sky. As night fell, Laura, a young woman with a penchant for solitude, found herself alone in her townhouse. Her husband, Michael, was away on a business trip, leaving her in the cozy home to weather the storm's aftermath. Laura, a lover of the outdoors, had always treasured the tranquility of her home, especially the skylight, which seemed to her like a portal to another world. Curled up on the couch with a cup of warm tea, she sought solace in the evening news. The familiar faces of the news anchors flashed across the television screen, and Laura turned her attention to the weather report. They were discussing the hail damage and the upcoming repairs that needed to be made throughout the city. Then, as if a shiver ran down her spine, Laura watched in disbelief as the news anchor's accent shifted. The anchorwoman's voice grew more somber as she began to recount a series of burglaries that had recently occurred. Particularly disturbing was the manner in which these crimes had been committed. Thieves had entered homes through skylights. Laura's heart raced as she listened intently, and fear gradually gripped her. Unable to resist, she glanced at the cracked skylight overhead, feeling a gnawing sense of vulnerability. The news showed surveillance footage of a shadowy figure, whose identity was obscured by the darkness, descending through the broken skylight. Just 5 minutes later, as the coverage continued, Laura's worst fears came true. A beam of light pierced the darkness of her living room, flickering haphazardly under the ceiling. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest, when the ominous sound of footsteps came from above. With trembling hands, Laura reached for the phone and dialed 911, describing the situation to the dispatcher in a shaky voice. Panic spilled through her veins and she locked herself in the bathroom, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "I think there's someone on the roof," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I saw a flashlight and heard footsteps." The dispatcher assured her that help was on the way, but every second seemed like an eternity. Laura braced herself against the phone, keeping her eyes on the bathroom door as if expecting an intruder to burst in at any moment. Minutes passed that seemed like hours, and then the front door swung open with a crash. Laura cried out, tears streaming down her face. She was sure that a burglar had broken in. She could hear her own heart pounding in her ears and begged the dispatcher to hurry. But then, to her shock and relief, a familiar voice called out, "Laura, it's me, it's Michael." Tears of relief mixed with her earlier terror. Laura unlocked the bathroom door and threw herself into her husband's arms. Michael hugged her tightly, explaining that he had come home early due to concerns about the aftermath of the hurricane. When they calmed down, Laura was able to explain the situation to Michael. He listened intently, and his face grew increasingly grim as he realized what had happened. It wasn't a burglar on the roof, but a maintenance man at the townhouse. With the mixture of annoyance and relief, Laura dialed 911 again to clear the situation with the dispatcher. She explained that the intruder was specifically the maintenance man who had been assigned to check the skylights for hail damage. Police soon arrived and confirmed Michael's words and confirmed the presence of the repairman. On the roof, the townhouse complex was relieved to learn that the burglar was not on the loose. When the repairman came down from the roof, he offered a half-joking apology for the scare he had inadvertently caused. Laura, still shaken, couldn't resist giving him a meaningful glance. Miguel lived in a small, cozy apartment in a quiet corner of the city. He loved the privacy of his home, where he was accompanied only by his faithful feline companion Whiskers. One chilly evening, Miguel found himself in his apartment, sprawled out on a worn couch. The apartment was flooded with the warm, soft light of dimmed lamps, creating a serene atmosphere that seemed to envelop him. Nestled under the plaid, he couldn't help but admire Whiskers, who was nestled snugly beside him, twitching his fluffy tail contentedly. Miguel couldn't resist the urge to capture this heartwarming moment and reached for the phone. On the coffee table, with great care, he began recording a video of Whiskers, and her adorable antics filled the entire frame. She pawed playfully at an imaginary object, and her little claws made quiet, clicking sounds as they hit the blanket. Miguel giggled at her antics, trying to keep quiet so as not to disturb the quiet atmosphere in the room. The videotape continued, showing Whiskers kneading the blanket, half closing her eyes in bliss. Miguel's heart sank with emotion as he captured these cherished moments. He couldn't help himself and spoke to the cat in a quiet, loving tone, his voice barely audible. After a few minutes, Miguel decided to stop recording. He put the phone aside and leaned back on the couch to review the footage. He was expecting to see touching memories that testified to the bond he had with his furry friend. But as soon as he pressed the play button, an eerie feeling swept over him. The room that had been silent before was now filled with a disturbing, faint melody. It was like a nursery rhyme, but distorted, slowed down, and barely audible. Miguel furrowed his eyebrows in confusion, never taking his eyes off the screen. Music, so inappropriate and eerie, played in the background as Whiskers continued her charming antics on the recording. The contrast between the cute kitty and the disturbing melody sent shivers running down her spine. With growing unease, Miguel tried to make sense of the situation. Perhaps there was a glitch in the recording, or maybe the phone's sound wasn't working. He decided to rewind the video to listen to the strange music again. But at that moment he noticed something even more disturbing. As he rewound, the music grew louder and the image of Whiskers became distorted. Her once charming antics became grotesque, her movements jagged and unnatural. It seemed as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling before our eyes. In a panic, Miguel immediately stopped the video and deleted it from his phone. His heart was pounding in his chest as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. He couldn't shake the feeling that something inexplicable and evil had invaded his peaceful home. Searching for answers, Miguel scoured the internet, trying to find any mention of such cases. He even asked the technicians to check his phone, but they found no logical explanation for the eerie music or the distorted video. Weeks turned into months, and Miguel continued to live in fear and uncertainty. Every creak in the apartment, every rustle of the curtains seemed to him an ominous presence lurking beyond sight. Whiskers, who had once been a source of comfort to him, now seemed to sense his anxiety, her behavior becoming increasingly erratic. Miguel considered moving, but he couldn't bear to leave his favorite apartment, his sanctuary. He tried to regain a sense of normalcy, but it kept eluding him. Eerie music and disturbing videos haunted his dreams, and the once quiet room seemed forever ruined.